Hello, I'm Sharon Ferris, Director of Marketing at CEREC, and on behalf of CEREC, I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Today's webinar is the third in a series of 5 webinars this week, where we'll be exploring impressive career service models at universities and colleges across Canada. For the next hour, we are delighted to have Dr. Peter Dietschy and a panel of career service leaders discussing the theme of intervention. Before we get going, just some quick housekeeping notes. If during today's webinar you have any questions, please enter them in the chat box that you see on your screen. We'll be leaving time for questions at the end of the webinar. And if you'd like to direct your question to any particular panelist, please be sure to note that. Then on Friday, we will email you copies of all of the slides as well as the recordings of each of the 5 webinars. We also encourage you to join the conversation about the webinar on social media using the Twitter hashtags and handles that you see on your screen. Now, I am delighted to introduce our presenters for today. Peter is the Emeritus Davis Chair in Community College Leadership at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, and the one who conducted the impressive career service model research that you're hearing about this week. And our panelists for today, representing those impressive models, are Carolyn Conrad, the Director of the Ryerson University Career Center, Lisa Russell, the Assistant Manager of Employment and Student Entrepreneurial Services at Fanshawe College, and Tony Botello, the Director of Simon Fraser University's Career and Volunteer Services. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us, and I will now turn it over to Peter.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Good morning, everyone, or good day, everyone. Happy to be here again for the third in a series of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So today we focus on another theme drawn from our interviews with career service staff in 15 colleges and universities across Canada. And the theme is intervention, or the what and how of career services delivery. The outline of the way the session will run basically is I'll introduce the theme for 10 minutes or less, using some of the data drawn from our online survey and the focus groups that we did across the country. Then the panelists will introduce themselves and comment on the theme. And then there'll be a fireside chat in the absence of a fire, I suppose, but with 3 to 5 questions posed to the panelists for comment. And then we'll try to leave around 10 minutes for questions and answers towards the end. So today's theme is, as I mentioned, intervention, or the what and how of career services delivery. And before I begin, I just wanted to highlight that for those who receive emails from CEREC, the CareerWise newsletter, it came across yesterday, and I noticed the title here, what is the best practice in career education outline of the evidence. And I perused that article this morning, and it really is very relevant to what we're talking about today. So I'd recommend folks to, if they didn't get this email, then to go to the CEREC website and you can find this particular publication. So in terms of the what and how, here's sort of the what part of it. When we did the online survey and we ended up with 67 institutions responding to our online survey, we asked, what kinds of services do you offer? And so here's a list, beginning with the percent of respondents who actually said they offered that particular service. So you can see that there's very large percentages corresponding to a large number of services provided either online or in person on campus. So that was one set. The second, so it continues on. As you can see, there's huge number of services being offered. The co-curricular record is less frequently seen, as well as entrepreneurship and start your own business workshops, that sort of thing. The top 10 services accessed by students, when you combine the online services with the in-person services, then you get this kind of sequence where the use of employer job postings is ranked number 1. This is based on input from the respondents on the survey. And then, of course, meeting with a career advisor or career counselor are also at the very top. If you took out and looked only at the on-campus services, then these two would be the top services offered, or at least used by students. In terms of the how, when you look at the drop-in versus appointment, then you can see that in terms of means, by appointment tends to dominate, although there's a huge amount of variability. So of the 51 institutions who responded to the drop-in question, there was a minimum of 1% who said they had drop-in and a 95% who said they had drop-in. So even within the drop-in dimension, there were a fair amount of variability across institutions. And then with the 56 institutions who responded to the appointment question, then again, you see some variability with some saying 100% of our contact with students is by appointment, but the average or the mean is 65. So appointment, in terms of the how, appointment seems to dominate. In terms of the face-to-face services, the on-campus services. Obviously, the online services are online. So these are our panelists, Carolyn Conrad, Lisa Russell, and Tony Botello, and we will pose questions. So I'm going to pass it over to Caroline to say a little bit about her role and who she is, and speak to this particular issue.
Hi, thank you, Peter. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Looking forward to our conversation. A little bit about myself. So, Director of Ryerson University Career Center, joined in summer 2014 with the remit of restructuring the Career Center and effectively our intervention model to what we've been calling a three-pillar model of career education, whereby the focus is on bridging the curricular and the co-curricular student experience. Really looking at how are we developing graduates to be agile for the new labor market. And our focus is effectively with that three pillars, working within faculty, working through student groups and societies, and really honing in on the multiple identities and backgrounds that our students come to when they arrive on campus, irrespective of their degree of study. As the model's evolved, we've expanded into faculty labor market teams when we work within faculty. And we now, really our three-pillar model is evolved into looking at three core areas of our department offering, and that's career education inside the faculty and within the curriculum as much as possible, campus engagement, increasingly focused on a tailored consultancy style work with employers around diversity hiring, and career integrated learning. So student staff development, both on and off campus, is a big part of our remit. And the proof really has been in the pudding for us, for what works for our students. We've seen in that first 12 months, we already saw student reach grow by 60% and employer reach similarly respond by about a 40% increase. Prior to joining the Canadian post-secondary landscape, I was head of careers over at University of Southampton in the UK, also overseeing there the integration of a faculty-based model across the three campuses there. And prior to that, my career is actually outside post-secondary within the private sector and international government relations. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Lisa? Sorry, Lisa, are you? Tony?
Yes.
Somehow we've lost Lisa, so hopefully she'll come back.
Oh, I think she's still muted.
Oh. Okay, well, could you say a little bit about yourself and your university, Tony?
Well, do you want to remind Lisa now? Give her a shot.
I think Sharon will probably do that.
Okay, so I'll say my part now.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Botello. I'm the Director for Career and Volunteer Services at Simon Fraser University. I started my role in 2000, or at least this current role in 2008. And for those of you who remembered what happened in 2008, you would know that that is a crappy year to start a new job, particularly in this sort of sector. Peter, is it okay if I say crappy on the webinar?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't actually. Okay, phew, a little concerned thereafter. One of the things, given this sort of context that we arrived in and sort of the uncertainty that was going on at that time, both with the university in terms of funding and our center, we started looking at sort of different ways of being, and it became clear to us that we had to get much better at aligning with what was important to the university. And at that time, issues like student retention and student engagement were very big and very important for a number of reasons. So initially, we started looking at how career education sort of aligned and supported some of these greater university goals regarding retention and engagement. And that started on a certain process. And then as we were doing that, we were also exploring other models to guide us. And we're initially very influenced by some of the happenstance work by Crumboltz and others. And then by happenstance, we came across some articles on chaos theory. And that really started to, that made a lot of sense for us in terms of how we were starting to see ourselves within the university context. And sort of from then on, a lot of how we sort of looked at our programming, looked at our role was through this chaos theory lens. So I think that's mostly what I want to say right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Lisa, are you able to?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks very much.
Hey, sorry about that. Thank you, Peter. First of all, I'd just like to say I'm really excited for the opportunity to be here. I've worked in employment service for about the last 20 years, initially in the not-for-profit sector. I've been with Fanshawe College for about 3.5 years now in my current role. Our career service is co-located with our cooperative education department as part of an integrated employment service that also includes our entrepreneurial incubator, our LEAP Junction, our entrepreneur center, and our off-campus community employment service. And so I'll talk a bit more about that model later on as we get into talking about interventions. We have 11 full-time staff and 2 part-time, as well as we've added fairly recently 2 student assistants, one from for international and one from our domestic student body. The department has 4 career consultant practitioners included in that full-time complement. So we report in as part of the student services for the campus. We serve about 18,000 students across about 215 programs. We have 45 co-op programs delivered at multiple campuses, but pretty much all of our programs have some element of experiential learning in them. I was happy to have had the opportunity to tune into the previous webinars, and the theme of collaboration yesterday really resonated with me, and certainly threads through many of the examples of some of our more successful recent interventions that I'll be sharing with the group today. Sorry about that sound problem. I think we're good now.
No worries. Thanks so much, Lisa.
It added an element of excitement.
Problem solving on the go. So by way of introducing the first question that I'll pose to the panelists, I wanted to draw from our research results from the survey when we asked people whether they used any particular theoretical model to underpin their service delivery. And so what we ended up seeing was, a range of different kinds of theoretical models, Crumboltz, the planned happenstance, chaos theory, Holland's. So the traditional sort of theoretical frameworks, including, the good old student development theory and Chickering's 7 vectors. So there are a variety of theoretical models out there. We saw that when we asked, how individuals interact with students, that typically the career advisor or career counsel would utilize a solution-focused or a client-centered approach, which is traditional in sort of the counseling domain. So there are a number of theories out there that people have used. So what I'd like to do then is pose to the panel, beginning with Caroline, the question of which theoretical models are being used to underpin career services, if any at all. Caroline?
Good. You guys can hear me now. Excellent.
Yes.
Keeping ourselves on our toes. Thank you, everyone, for your patience with us. Speaking from our side over at Ryerson, as I mentioned, we did go through a complete overhaul of the service 3 years ago. So really moving away from a more traditional intervention model to looking at ways in which we could seamlessly integrate academic learning and student development. And on that sense, Keeling has influenced our train of thought. Other areas for us, which probably be a bit different from Tony and Lisa, so I'm just going to speak to our experience here. It's very much been heavily on the student development theory side. So Chickering and Weiser's 7 vectors was key to underpinning the work that we undertook to overhaul our on-campus work study program, for instance, which falls under the Career Center. We have, over 1,000 positions each year that we oversee. And the work that we did there was to really start embedding learning outcomes into every student on-campus job. And it was Chickering and Weiser's approach to moving the student from into developing autonomy, developing and mature interpersonal relationships, and managing emotions. Those were all angles of which we looked to and sought to embed in terms of the development program that we put alongside the work study model. Other areas that have impacted us, again, I'm speaking more on the student development theory, but Sanford's challenge and self-authorship very much influenced the way in which we evolved on-campus work to include personalized development plans and a professional development program within that body, within that offering. For us, I mentioned Keeling's Learning Reconsidered. Other areas for us have been, Ku's reference to seamless environments, and that has really impacted how we've moved closer and closer into the curriculum, and in fact now are working hand in hand with a number of faculty on curriculum design. The other side I want to just refer to before handing over to Tony, for us has been how do we look at actually employer interventions and moving away from what historically, at least for us, was a more transactional model with employers, and starting to look at how are we actually developing interventions with employer relationships? How are we reviewing and considering the aspects of where our students are going out into that world, and how are we informing onboarding and recruitment strategy with employers? So some of the work that's influenced us there has been Michelle Moore-Barak's side, which is looking at the fact that when we look at graduates and we break them down by equity-seeking population, the reality is that they are going to face very different challenges when they're going out into the working world, regardless of what their degree or what their GPA is going to look like. And so her work and her studies have actually informed, and her counterparts have really informed how we started to redesign our employer offering and moving it around different distinct strategies to support equity-seeking groups and to support employers with building relationships with equity-seeking groups. I'll just pause right now on that front and hand it over to one of my counterparts.
Okay, thanks so much, Caroline. Lisa.
Thanks, Peter. Certainly, Super's development theory plays in with the depth. It defines all life stages and how career development occurs in each. So, as practitioners, we're finding that our students are multidimensional and they're presenting with ever more complex needs. So, being mindful of where they're at and how career development occurs in each of those phases certainly comes into play. As well, when I think of supers, it's important for our practitioners to really capture and understand the influences that affect the career choice that the students made, and be mindful of those when they're interacting and we're interacting with our students. Another kind of standard theory that comes into play, of course, is Holland's. It's useful in that it's very well researched, and it has both the formal and informal assessments available with the career matching piece. And looking at student development theory, part of the exercise that we went through as the Student Services Management Group in developing our priority plan out into 2020 was reviewing those theories of student development. So certainly Tinto's 3 stages and as Caroline mentioned, Arthur Chickering's psychosocial theory and the 7 vectors, and the work that we do, and as we develop and implement new interventions in career service, certainly needs to align with that as well. And one last thought, with the rapidly changing labor market that our students are going to be entering when they graduate, it's really giving them the tools to be able to identify opportunities. So the happenstance theory of being able to identify and create opportunities and create a work project or a job for themselves out of that ability and that skill set.
Terrific. Thanks, Lisa. Over to you, Tony.
Sorry, is it better if I vocalize, right? I was feeling left out, so I wanted to have my moment as well.
Okay.
So as mentioned, yeah, we actually, in our review, it started at, say, 2008, 2009. We started really with some of the student the development principles and started to look at the overlap of some of the contemporary career development theory and student development theory. And again, many of the ones that were mentioned today. And I think, again, I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree, like, again, the fact that we are housed within post-secondary institutions is one of the main things that separates us from other career practitioners. So again, understanding the student experience, understanding some of the student development models and approaches, I think is particularly important for those of us who work in this field within this context. Again, many of the ones that I think have been discussed already today, Learning Reconsidered has been a major influence for us, both in terms of what we do, but in terms of the space, in terms of how it's influenced student services generally here at SFU, and in giving us the space to do some of the things we've done in the last few years. We also, Aston's theories of involvement, whether or not it's a theory, we can argue that, but he calls it that. And we've also, with some work related to internal transition, looked at Schlossberg's stages of transitions, which is very fun to say several times quickly. So I think that side of things is, I think, important for us to be aware of and cognizant at. We also have very good partnerships, as came up in the conversations Lisa mentioned from yesterday. So in many ways, our colleagues in student services, we let them to be the experts in that kind of stuff, but we also have, need to have a certain amount of awareness to see where things overlap. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of career stuff that's influenced us the most is the chaos theory of careers. Again, it's not an either-or theory. It works quite nicely with other theoretical approaches and models. But for us, it made just so much sense because as we're looking at the student development and as we're looking at the need to support students earlier on in their academic life, this notion of change and complex change and chance and sort of this interesting interplay, it really fit. So the way we look at it is, again, when we started this process, we were very much a more traditional planning route when we were working with students, a lot more test and sort of support, and you're going to be here. But as we became more aware of this sort of your typical undergrad experience, I think in Canada it's about 5.5 years for a typical undergraduate degree. A lot can happen in 5.5 years. So what we would say is the world of work, the outside world, can change dramatically in 5.5 years. One of the examples we like to give is that a typical US presidential term is 4 years. So in a 5.5 year, you're pretty much guaranteed to cover at least 2 presidential terms. And just that event alone can have a significant impact in the world, let alone all the other stuff. At the same time, 5.5 years is a significant time in any of our lives in terms of our change and development. And then back to some of the student development stuff, starting at your typical 18 or 19, whatever you get, that 5.5 year period is particularly lots going on and change and development and shifts. And at the same time, students are being taught courses by some of the smartest people in the world. And those courses are designed to challenge the way they view the world, they think about things, the way they see things. And as a result, a natural outcome of that is they're going to see the world differently and their place in the world differently. So for us, that's why the chaos model fits so nicely for us, because again, it's really about supporting students early and sort of normalizing this notion of uncertainty and change, but then actually giving them some tools to help navigate that.
Thanks, Tony. So it looks like, based on the comments of the three panelists, that really it reflects the findings of our survey, which was there was no one theory that really dominated the development of career services. It was a smorgasbord, if you will, of different kinds of theoretical frameworks that can be used where necessary based on the local context and the goals of a particular service. So as necessary, people would choose a particular framework, and that would basically drive the structure and function of a particular service that was being developed based on, again, the characteristics of the student population unique to the particular institution. By way of introducing the next topic or the next question, we posed this question to the directors of career services. We asked, what had happened in terms of resources over the last 5 years and what they thought was going to happen over the next 5 years. And I'm going to focus on the future here, the next 5 years. And as you can see, in terms of budget, the vast majority felt there was going to be no change. In terms of staffing, again, no change. And in terms of space, again, no change in space. But when we asked about the number of services they felt were going to be delivered, the vast majority, 3 out of 4, said they were going to increase the number of services. So interesting that in a static resource environment, the directors of career services were anticipating an increase in the number of services. We also asked top 3 issues of greatest challenge for career services directors. And not surprisingly, the resource challenges came out as number 1. And in fact, when we posed this question to our 155 participants on Monday, the vast majority said the very same thing, that the greatest challenge is a resource challenge. So we have a situation where the leaders of career service departments are looking at increasing the number of services they're going to offer, but within a resource environment that is incredibly constrained. So that leads to the next question, which is, are there any popular and emerging intervention strategies being developed that may help deal with that particular conundrum? And I'm going to ask Lisa if you could start with that one, please.
Certainly. And I'll say it again, a key theme that runs through some of the examples I'm going to share is collaboration and partnership. With limited resources, we have to be ever more innovative and look at who the other stakeholders are and how we can work collegially and collaboratively for the benefit of our students, and so that all stakeholders' needs are met. Highlighted in the report that Peter published, I'll just review a couple of the intervention strategies that we've been implementing. We've implemented a career conference, and this is a partnership with collaboration with our student union and our employer partners. There's also participation from our faculty. It's a full day Saturday conference, and it's intended and designed deliberately to be like the conferences that you and I attend as part of our work. So it was developed and specifically to address the soft skills and the emotional intelligence that we keep hearing in surveys are the things that employers are looking for when they are hiring, when they're hiring and looking for new talent. Those are important skills. So that has been very successful. It has concurrent running workshops and panels. There's an employer panel with an opportunity for Q&A, and it's been very well received by the students as well as the partners that have participated with us. And as it continues to grow in popularity, we've offered it for the last 3 years. Don't Cancel That Class is another intervention that we've developed. Again, when we talked, some of the panelists yesterday were talking about the importance of relationship building and kind of maintaining those relationships so that collaboration can happen and can support the needs of our students. And don't cancel that class, which is a service that we developed for our academics who are aware of sometimes the need to cancel a class in advance due to a conference or some travel. And so we will go in and deliver tailored career-related workshops during that space so that the student doesn't have the frustration of seeing the sign on the door when they arrive for class. And then we get the opportunity to speak about career in the context of the class that would have happened in that time space. A few other partnership interventions that are continuing to grow and build and gain traction is our Larry Minty Mentorship Program. This program used to be completely run out of our Alumni Services office. We have partnered with the alumni through the last year and a bit on the program, and our career services consultants and our office recruits the students, and the Alumni Association recruits the mentors. And we have had, through that process, we identify the students that are ready and could really benefit from that particular intervention at that time much more easily than the alumni office can, because we're interacting with these students. And so the matches rose exponentially as soon as we switched that model and created that partnership and started delivering that intervention in that way. We've got our Rising Leaders program, again, addressing some soft skills development. Again, with partnership, we've got faculty who are coming in and facilitating some of those sessions. All of these different sessions that the majority are eligible for building co-curricular record as well, which is another important feature for our students. And I think in terms of talking about all of these different interventions, the overarching strategy that I want to just touch on briefly is that's really helped us to move some of these interventions forward is our integrated model and our continuum of services. So we are participating actively on PACs, program advisory committees. We are interacting with faculty, and so that is helping them to recognize the value that career services brings. But the continuum of service includes, for example, that student who has those, at graduation, has some of those barriers that really need some more intense coaching and counseling. The referral happens to our community employment service, where they can get that one-on-one employment counseling, as well as referrals to resources out in the broader community as appropriate for mental health and many other different services in the community. So,
terrific. Thanks so much, Lisa. Over to you, Tony.
All right, thank you. In terms of strategies, I would say one of the biggest ones for us in terms of how we do particularly our one-to-one support with students has been moving to a much more narrative approach in terms of our interactions with students. We're not doing as much. We're really almost zero testing these days, but it has been, so all of us have been trained a few times now in using techniques, strategies more aligned with sort of narrative approaches, trying to get the idea of students understanding their stories and different stories and what we can pull from each of those past activities and events to help with clarity and also being able to identify possibilities for the future. So I would say that's one of the biggest changes in sort of how we do things in technique. We're also trying to do more stuff with games and this notion of gamification of activities. Really good examples from our colleagues over at in Nova Scotia Community College, which I'll let them talk about because they're not here, so I'm not going to plug them any more than that. And in addition, in terms of how we actually run our own programming, again, I think touching on something Lisa said is this notion of relationships and collaboration is increasingly important. We used to run a whole bunch of one-off workshops. We've pretty much stopped doing that for a few years now. Things we do now are either by series, where we might clump a few things together, and the rationale for that comes from sort of consultation with our teaching and learning people. Basically, they told us that all those one-off workshops that we were super proud of were really nice, but they were limited in benefit because of the nature of how people learn and the importance of iterative and repetition, the iterative nature of learning and repetition. So you can actually get much deeper in a series than you can with one-offs. In addition, some of the topics that we were most interested in students being exposed to, they wouldn't necessarily show up for those. So by packaging things in a series, they might come for the ones they liked, but we'd actually be able to infuse the content that we actually thought was most valuable. And then related to that again is back to the collaboration is increasingly what we're trying to do is actually embed our stuff in other people's stuff. A lot of that is academic, you know, any faculty area course who will talk to us, we will go very excitedly and interact and be very pleasant and polite with them in most of our interactions. So that's a big part of it, but increasingly also with our student affairs, student services partners, where there are initiatives, particularly where they have large access to students, or because of their connections to faculty, we can sort of ride their coattails. One of the things we've discussed in our team is I think we're quite good on the career development side of things. I think we develop quite interesting, innovative programming, but we're not particularly great marketers. That's not what we weren't hired for our marketing skill. So where we can actually embed and use other people's abilities and focus on the things that we think we do best, that's a good one for us. So two big initiatives for us is this one called Back on Track, which is a retention program for students who otherwise would have been required to withdraw. Again, it's organized by the student engagement retention team here, and we sort of come in and deliver some career sessions in that. And another one is a partner with our academic advisors called How I Met My Major. And this is really focusing students early on who are struggling with this notion of how to, when and what major to declare. So again, it's a combination of some of the student development literature and some of the career development to try and package together some programming that will help students make more informed choices.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Caroline, anything, intervention strategies?
Yeah, just picking up on Lisa and Tony's remarks, for us too, the storytelling approach when it comes to supporting students on that individual aspect. The other area that continues, and I know we're talking about popular and emerging strategies, but one that does really stand the test of time is going back to Sanford and Challenge and South authorship, as well as Cold. And where we're looking at we're increasingly moving away from focusing solely on the career counseling and looking more at how are we developing initiatives that enable students to teach themselves, giving them that real world experience. So two examples there are, we began 2 years ago an off-campus work study program entitled Career Boost Off Campus, and through that it's very much about the student themselves gaining that exposure, that experience, and then linking it back to that overall, what's that story I'm building for myself, and then using that individual intervention within the program development. So a student will apply for these work experiences, but actually go through individual counseling with the career education specialist running that program before they go off to even an interview with that employer. The other angle to another distinct student population we work with in that manner is our PhD students. So developing a job shadow program for them. But as part of that job shadow, it is going through group interventions where we are teaching you effectively how to sell your story. What is your value proposition? How are you translating your research expertise into, let's say, pedantic language for industry, and then wrapping that up with that real world experience. I referred earlier to our approach with employers, and that's really growing from strength to strength. And we're finding that it's about, with employers, looking at how are we supporting their equity and recruitment, recruitment strategies from an equity perspective. Because for us, our student population has 143 different nationalities within our 42,000 campus size. And so that is a very big part of what we do. Also thinking for our side very much is new Canadian and adult learner. We have a very large new Canadian cohort, so students who came to Canada at 15 and beyond. So for us, work like Nancy Arthur's social justice theory and the culture-infused counseling very much play a part of our approach and what we're looking at. Combining that with the storytelling aspect, our Voices of Experience, networking a speaker panel series for students tends to focus on a very distinct group where you're bringing in leaders and alumni who are talking about the challenges they may have faced. So recently we ran a session on Islamophobia in the workplace, bringing back alumni and community leaders who had used distinct aspects from their personal background, both to their advantage and also explaining how did they overcome challenges in the labor market that are frankly just purely based on societal challenges. And so that's a big part for us. One point I just wanted to touch on with regards to emerging intervention strategies. Dwayne Brown talks very much about value-based model of career choice. And for us, there's two areas that resonates. One, in the growing millennial population and how they approach the world of work. And second, in terms of when we're talking about individuals from a very diverse range of cultural backgrounds, how do values from your culture and from your personal environment impact your career choices? How we have often, and I'm sure we're not alone on this, students who will come for an individual intervention and that conversation then turns to, my parents want me to get this degree because, or I'm allowed to get this degree and then I have to go off and get married. So those are angles that we deal with on a regular basis, is how are cultural values influencing your career choice and how do we help separate the different influencers in your life to help you make that individual choice on your own.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caroline. I just want to remind everyone that a lot of the strategies that have been discussed just now are documented within the second report, Insight into Impressive Practices in Career Services, a reference guide. And so the back of that document, the reference guide portion, people have discussed or presented these kinds of strategies. So if people want to refer to those, they can get more information. One of the themes that we heard over and over again from our interviews was this notion of creating institutional commitment, and specifically the notion of engaging faculty and staff. Somebody talked about engaging faculty as being the holy grail in terms of providing some penetration on campus with students. And so one of the things we looked at was whether folks actually had an embedded career-focused curriculum on their campus, and whether there was any kind of policy around faculty engaging students in career-related topics. And as you can see, there was some movement in that area. There was, 53% in some programs. Again, faculty encouraged in some programs. So there seemed to be some progression along those lines. But the third question then is, can embedding career in curriculum and promoting faculty-student conversations on career topics improve the reach of career services? So I'll begin now with Tony.
Well, thank you, Peter. Well, I think the question does sort of answer itself. Yes. I think that the more challenging question is the how. Yeah. It's the, how do we actually do this? So I think in our case, we've sort of, I think with many of us, we have a very, a limited number of staff. In our case, around 10 human beings, professional staff for about 35,000 students. And so we are unable to provide the 10 of us are able to provide 35,000 students individualized support throughout the life of their university. So I think it's important for us, back to the point I raised earlier, to partner and partner smartly. I think, and again, and even if you look, I remember there's been some research on this, and I can't remember specifically, students don't necessarily even come to career centers first when they're thinking about their career conversations. There's from things I've read, career conversations are more likely to happen with faculty and instructors, and then even academic advisors, and then they may come to us. So, we might be number 3 on their minds anyway. This is not even talking about family and friends and that sort of thing. So I think it's critical for us to engage. I think whenever there's a new program on campus, I think that's a unique opportunity for us to get at the ground floor, but also to look at, in our case, where we can be of benefit to specific faculty areas or particular classes, and providing some evidence to back that up. I would say in the current climate, there are certain faculty areas, I would say faculty of arts in North America have been not getting the best publicity in the media, and I think that's had some impact on sort of perception and potentially even enrollments. So I think this is where an opportunity for us to sort of say, hey, here's where we can help. We can change some of that perception amongst students and others by incorporating some programming, and that's some of the things we've been doing. And I think the program I talked about earlier, How I Met My Major, is one of those strategies. I think similarly, we shouldn't forget the other groups on campus, the non-academic side, that also has a lot of reach, and again, particularly groups like academic advisors, where I think we can also, some of the messaging, we can increase the level of the sophistication of the career conversations that are happening across campus generally. And it doesn't always have to be workshops and programs. There could be other things we're doing as well.
Oh, terrific. Thanks very much. Caroline.
Yeah, so we are a faculty-based model. Does that mean that as soon as we became a faculty-based model overnight, suddenly we were in the classroom delivering in the curriculum? Absolutely not. What it did mean, and I guess this is the experience I can share with others who are looking to get more engaged with faculty, because yes, fundamentally, as been said here, it is working hand in hand with faculty as much as possible to reach students. Where we began really was looking at ourselves as consultants to faculty. We are not there to necessarily deliver the end result always. We might be there as advisors or consultants on various aspects. So one example there is we work with faculty both on an individual base and in group, delivering group sessions around student staff development. Many students work alongside faculty during their degree. How are we ensuring that that experience for the student and the faculty member is a professional development experience? So we go out and do staff learning sessions with faculty twice a month. We run them across campus, and we also do them on a as a request basis within particular programs. And then we also do one-to-one coaching actually for academics on request in terms of maximizing the experience for their student staff. Another angle that we take in terms of our work with faculty is, it's really basic at the end of the day. It's listening to what might be the challenge or the problem, and then looking at a solution and not picking from a fixed menu, and recognizing that at every turn, it's going to be a different approach, even within a particular faculty. Whether you're working with chemical engineering or industrial engineering, you might be taking 2 entirely different approaches. Where we are now 3 years on is, if we use engineering as an example, 3 years ago, we went in and we looked at all the angles where we could deliver career sessions alongside, let's say, the largest class cohort, putting it in an hour before, so that you're at least having that trickle-down effect of students coming out of that class, coming into the career education session. Then we moved into, on a case-by-case basis, some heavy-handed, not mandatory sessions for those going on internship. Lots of advocating from the faculty to attend these sessions. Then where we're moving now is we're actually piloting what will be a mandatory curriculum for all students in the 7 programs going on internship within their course. And that has been a journey, but it will be a pilot next year, followed by embedding it across formally within the faculty over 3 years. So that in itself, from start to finish, was a 6-year journey. The other angle, I would say, in terms of building that trust and value with faculty is in terms of the data that we see every day within a career practitioner point of view. The data that you're getting and the insight you're getting from employers, where you're seeing students go off onto. So we launched, and I know Wilfred Laurier has been doing this for many years. Last year, we launched a graduate destination survey for our students, which is tracking the graduate class on an annual basis and looking at everything from the postcode they're currently working in to why they took that role to what type of contract they're on, so that we can support faculty in having further information on where are students going through, and then where can we now actually decide, does that chemical engineering class actually need a different type of intervention than maybe we thought previously, and therefore have a greater reach?
Terrific, thanks. Lisa.
Similar to Tony, I would say the short answer to the question is yes. Resonate with a lot of what Caroline shared as well. We have I would say that some of the strategies we use to kind of help make this happen more easily is really doing everything we can to tell our story at every chance and at every level within the institution, not just with faculty, but anyone who will listen. And we've done that in a few fairly simple and inexpensive ways. We created an infographic of statistics, and our senior leader took that on the road show and would present it to anyone who would listen to her. And it really started getting some traction at the higher levels. We created an academic guide, which is a small booklet, and it was delivered multiple copies to every school. So we're trying to connect in any way that we can. And as Carolyn mentioned, how can we help them do their jobs and meet their goals more effectively in terms of the services they're providing to our students? Another example, Carolyn mentioned quasi-mandatory activity pre-placements for internships and that sort of thing. We have a mandatory preparation that our students need to do before their paid co-op work terms for all of our co-op programming. And so those co-op consultants are co-located with our career consultants and are developing relationships with the faculty, and then see opportunities for when maybe they can draw in the career consultants to assist the faculty in ways as well. And we're starting to get traction from the approach of just really getting out there. We're being invited to more tables at more senior levels. There's a Gen Ed credit being developed in consultation with our Career Services Department. Faculty are delivering on some of our programming and partnering on the delivery of some of our Rising Leaders material and within our entrepreneurial incubator. So we've got support for the entrepreneurial programming in the areas of things like financial literacy and accounting and marketing and all of those pieces. So career consultants are making their way into classrooms much more frequently as a result of some of these endeavors. Another thing that we did that, again, Tony mentioned, it's not just with academics that we want to kind of get our reach and the visibility. We hosted an employer dinner for the last couple of years, and it's really grown tremendously. And the first year, we within our employment service area picked up the tab, but we invited all of the employer-facing areas of the college, corporate training solutions, our research folks, so all of those pieces that reach out to employers as well. And so year two, they then were actively partnering and sharing in the cost of it, and it just continued to grow. And so then they see the value in partnering with us in terms of getting to their stakeholders as well. So there's lots of different ways to get your good story out there throughout the institution, but it's important to do it at all levels, because when you start getting attention at all the different levels, then the reach is more effective.
Great, terrific. Thanks, Lisa. So I'm cognizant of the fact that we only have really a few more minutes left for this webinar, and I'd like to provide the opportunity for folks who are online to pose their questions to myself or the panelists. So I'm going to hand it over to Sharon, who will be able to tell us what kinds of questions have been posed.
All right, yes, we do have several questions. So the first one is for any of the panelists, or perhaps all of you. Meg says she's curious as to whether you foresee any growth in the number of career counselors working in your centers, or at least maintaining the numbers you currently have.
Yeah, Carolyn here. I do see growth happening, but I see it in terms of for very distinct student populations. So looking at, for instance, students with declared disabilities on the autism spectrum, for instance, how on the one hand, yes, you can continue to increase your staff's knowledge as a whole to support that student population, but to really create a step change, I see us developing distinct roles to meet the needs of specific student cohort.
I would agree, and would add to that the growth of the international student population and the supports that they require.
Terrific.
All right, a question directed at Tony next from Sheila. Sheila would like to know if, building on the scaffolding approach to learning that you referenced earlier, if you could provide some examples of the series of workshops and learning approaches that they use, and in particular, how many sessions are in a series, and is there continuity in attendance?
Nice question there, Sheila. So we have one main series right now that's 6 parts. We're going through a process of actually reviewing that now, and we're thinking we may actually make 2 slightly shorter series with a level 1 and level 2. But typically how we start things off is in the first 2 sessions is our foundations, and usually there's what we'd call some sort of myth busting. We really address issues around non-linearity is the norm in careers. There's a lot of shift and change. We try to normalize that. We look at issues like influences that impact people's decisions. So we set that as a bit of a foundation, and then we do, depending on the session, sometimes we'll use either a game or some sort of mind mapping activities to help students reflect on past activities and events that they've done. And then from there, we help them generate different activities to generate possibilities, and then usually some action strategies. So those are, in the first 2 sessions, we really call those the foundations. And then from there, we can then start moving into some of the more typical technique stuff, the exploration, the resume cover letter stuff. But we usually don't want to do that until we have that other foundation first. And typically with the series, people who stay, then they typically are pretty good at staying through. Retention rates for those who show up are usually in around the 80+% rates for those who show up for the first session.
All right, and I think we have time for one last question, although 2 individuals, both Tracy and Heather, asked a form of this, so a popular one. And so they both want to know about any collaboration that's occurring between your post-secondary institutions and high schools, and in particular prospective students, if you can comment on that. And this is to any of the panelists.
We partner with our, sorry, go ahead, Carolyn.
Nope, all yours.
Okay, we partner with our recruitment office in terms of outreach to high schools, particularly in the First Nations communities. We've been doing some targeted outreach there with those communities, and have developed a Find Your Future program where so our career folk participate on the exploration side of things, and then recruitment helps with kind of navigating some of the pieces that come once some course decisions are made. So that's one area. We also call that Find Your Future at Fanshawe. We call that program. We also do collaborate with our, sorry, I lost my thought. I'll leave it there. Go on.
Anybody else?
Carolyn here. I'd say we're not actively going out on the ground with recruitment. We do have a close relationship with recruitment. In fact, we even share a student staff every summer who works between the 2 departments on shared projects. Rather, the approach we take with our partnership with recruitment is whatever we are building is looking at how that can then be messaged out to prospective students and their parents. So for example, the graduate destination survey I mentioned, how are we utilizing key messages from that to share with prospective students and their parents? Another angle is looking at our partnerships on campus and how that is then messaged out to prospective students and their families. With the Students Union, we just launched a partnership to support bursaries for students on unpaid internships through our career development grant program. And the messaging from there then that then goes out through our recruitment team is very much about Ryerson's commitment to ensuring you have opportunity for paid high impact work experience. So those are the angles we're looking at rather than feet on the ground out in the local areas.
Thanks, Caroline. So we're out of time, but I'd like to thank the panelists very, very much for your contribution of time and creative thinking to this.
You're welcome.
And I will add my thanks, Carolyn, Lisa, Tony, as well as to Peter. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will email you links to the slides and recordings of all the webinars after the conclusion of the series on Friday, along with a short evaluation form. And then we are back tomorrow taking a look at the theme of innovation with the career service leaders at Queen's University, Laval University, and Nova Scotia Community College. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you then. Thank you.